Emperor Zaxeth stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching the dying planet below. The once blue world of Kepler 442b now glowed with the orange fires of destruction. His fleet had done its work well. The orbital bombardment had lasted exactly 47 minutes, just long enough to ensure complete devastation while leaving the mineral deposits intact. The numbers scrolled across his neural implant: 2.3 million dead. Among them, according to his tactical AI, were 5,731 children under the age of maturity. The Keplerian species aged differently than most galactic races, reaching maturity at what other species would consider middle age. Their children were precious to them, each one representing decades of careful nurturing. Zaxeth felt nothing as he reviewed the statistics. Emotion was weakness. And weakness had no place in the hegemony. For 3,000 years, his empire had expanded across the galaxy, consuming worlds and species with methodical efficiency. The Keplerians had simply made the mistake of refusing to surrender their dilithium mines when given the chance. "Your Magnificence," came the voice of Admiral Thex, his second-in-command. "All resistance has been eliminated. The mining operations can begin within the solar week." "Excellent!" Zaxeth's voice carried across the bridge through his mechanical vocal enhancers. His original vocal cords had been replaced centuries ago with cybernetic improvements. "What of the survivors?" "Minimal. Perhaps a few thousand scattered across the outer settlements. They pose no threat to our operations." Zaxeth nodded. Survivors were useful sometimes. They spread word of the hegemony's power, encouraged other worlds to submit without resistance. Fear was often more efficient than warfare. The Emperor was a towering figure even by the standards of his species. His people, the Vrexians, were naturally tall and imposing, but Zaxeth had enhanced himself far beyond biological limitations. Cybernetic implants replaced most of his organs. Genetic modification had tripled his natural lifespan. Nanomachines in his bloodstream prevented aging and disease. He had ruled the hegemony for 800 years and planned to rule for 800 more. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," reported Communications Officer Kylix from her station. "It's unusual." "Explain." "It's not coming from the planet's surface. The signal originates from deep space beyond our sensor range. Very narrow beam, highly focused. It's directed specifically at your personal communication frequency." This was indeed unusual. Zaxeth's personal frequency was classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of beings in the galaxy knew it, and all of them were currently aboard this ship or at the Imperial capital. "Put it through!" he commanded. The bridge fell silent. Every officer and technician stopped their work to listen. It was rare for anyone to contact the Emperor directly during a military operation. The communication system crackled to life. At first, there was only static and the background hum of space. Then, cutting through the interference, came a single word spoken in perfect galactic standard. "No." That was all. One word delivered with quiet certainty, then nothing but silence. The bridge crew exchanged glances. Admiral Thex stepped forward, his expression confused. "Shall I trace the signal, Your Magnificence?" Zaxeth raised a hand for silence. Something about that single word had sent an odd sensation through his enhanced nervous system. In 800 years of rule, no one had ever said no to him and meant it. People begged, pleaded, bargained, and screamed, but they never simply said no as if it were a fact of nature. "Run a linguistic analysis," he ordered. "I want to know what species spoke that word." The ship's AI began processing immediately. Within moments, data flowed across the central display screen. "Analysis complete, Your Magnificence. The vocal patterns and linguistic markers indicate human origin." "Human?" Admiral Thex looked puzzled. "But the humans are barely space-capable." Their furthest settlements are 300 light-years from here. They couldn't possibly have ships that could reach this sector. Zaxeth had heard of humans, of course. Every major power in the galaxy kept files on emerging species. The humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. They had no significant military presence beyond their own small corner of space. Yet somehow, one of them had transmitted a message to his personal frequency from impossible distances. "Increase our scanning range," Zaxeth commanded. "I want every ship in the fleet looking for the source of that transmission." Hours passed as the fleet searched. Their sensors, capable of detecting a small asteroid at 10 light-years distance, found nothing. No ships, no stations, no artificial structures of any kind. As the search continued, reports began arriving from across the Empire. The same word, delivered in the same tone, had been received by governors and fleet commanders throughout hegemony space, always on secure, classified frequencies, always impossible to trace. By the time the Kepler 442b mining operation was established, Zaxeth had received 17 more reports. Someone was systematically contacting every major figure in his empire with the same simple message: no. Back in his private quarters aboard the flagship, Zaxeth accessed the Imperial database on humanity. The files were sparse. Humans had evolved on a planet called Earth in the Orion arm of the galaxy. They were a young species, having only achieved space travel within the last century. Their technology was based on crude fusion and early antimatter principles. What caught his attention were the psychological profiles. Human behavior patterns showed unusual traits compared to other sapient species. They were described as irrationally persistent, emotionally driven, and prone to self-sacrifice for abstract concepts. One report, filed by a hegemony trade representative who had visited Earth, contained an interesting observation. Humans appear to have difficulty accepting permanent defeat. Even when facing overwhelming odds, they continue to resist. This may be a survival trait from their evolution on a particularly hostile world. Zaxeth closed the files and contemplated this information. The hegemony had conquered over 40,000 worlds. They had faced species with advanced technology, powerful weapons, and vast resources. They had always won through superior firepower and organizational efficiency, but they had never faced a species that simply refused to acknowledge defeat. 3 days later, as the fleet prepared to depart Kepler 442b, the communications officer reported another incoming transmission. This time, it wasn't just one word. "Your Magnificence, we're receiving multiple signals. Same source type, same impossible origin point. But there are hundreds of them. Put them through." The bridge filled with voices. Hundreds of different humans, speaking in dozens of different languages and accents, but all saying the same thing: no. Some voices were young, some old. Some spoke with anger, others with sadness. A few laughed as they said it, as if the whole situation were somehow amusing. But each voice carried the same absolute certainty that had characterized the first transmission. "Cut the transmission," Zaxeth ordered. As the voices faded, the Emperor realized he was experiencing something he hadn't felt in centuries: uncertainty. In his long life, he had encountered every type of resistance imaginable. He had seen species fight to the last warrior, others surrender immediately, and everything in between. But he had never encountered an entire species that seemed to believe their opinion mattered more than his fleet's firepower. Standing alone in his quarters that night, Zaxeth made a decision. The humans had inserted themselves into Imperial business by interfering with his communications. This required a response. He activated his personal command interface and began drafting orders for the Fifth Fleet. It was time to pay Earth a visit. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to teach humans their place in the galactic order, he was about to give them exactly what they seemed to want: his attention. But the Emperor of the Hegemony had never lost a war. He certainly wasn't going to lose to a species that had barely learned to leave their home planet. Admiral Thex entered his quarters as he finished the orders. "Your Magnificence, the fleet is ready for departure. Where shall we set course?" "Earth," Zaxeth replied. "It's time to teach the Fifth Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system with precise military efficiency. 200 warships, each capable of glassing a continent, arranged themselves in perfect formation around the blue-green world that had dared to say no to the Emperor." Zaxeth studied Earth through the enhanced sensors of his flagship. The planet looked deceptively peaceful from this distance. Swirling white clouds, vast blue oceans, and patches of green and brown that marked the continents where 4 billion humans lived their brief lives. "Initial scans complete, Your Magnificence," reported Admiral Thex. "The planet appears to have minimal orbital defenses. We're detecting approximately 40 primitive space stations and a few hundred civilian vessels. No military installations of significant threat level." "What about their communications?" "Heavily active. They're broadcasting on thousands of frequencies simultaneously. News networks, government channels, civilian traffic. They appear to be discussing our arrival." This was unusual. Most species either maintained communication silence when faced with the hegemony's fleet, hoping to avoid notice, or immediately began broadcasting surrender offers. Humans seemed to be doing neither. "Put me through to their primary governmental communication frequency," Zaxeth commanded. "Yes, Your Magnificence. You're connected to what they call the United Nations Emergency Assembly. They appear to have called an emergency session." Zaxeth activated his communication systems. His voice, enhanced by cybernetic modulators to carry maximum authority and intimidation, echoed across the bridge and transmitted directly to the human government. "I am Emperor Zaxeth of the Galactic Hegemony. You have interfered with Imperial communications and inserted yourselves into matters beyond your understanding. I offer you one opportunity to surrender unconditionally. Submit to Imperial authority and accept Protectorate status, or face the same fate as the Keplerians of World 442b. He waited for the response. Usually there would be immediate panic, desperate pleas for negotiation, or sometimes defiant speeches before inevitable surrender. Instead, after a moment of silence, a voice responded in accented galactic standard. It was calm, professional, and completely unimpressed. "This is Secretary General Chen Wei of the United Nations. We have received your message, Emperor Zaxeth. Our answer remains the same: no." The bridge fell silent. Admiral Thex looked bewildered. "Your Magnificence, they appear to be refusing your offer." "I can hear that, Admiral." Zaxeth leaned forward in his command throne. "Open the channel again." "Secretary General Chen." Zaxeth's voice carried a note of warning that had made entire star systems surrender without a fight. "Perhaps you don't understand the situation. I have 200 warships in orbit around your planet. Each one carries enough firepower to destroy your largest cities. Your species has barely achieved interplanetary travel. You have no chance of victory in armed conflict." There was a pause, then the human voice returned, still maddeningly calm. "We understand the military situation perfectly, Emperor. We also understand that you recently murdered 5,731 children on Kepler 442b. Our answer to joining such an organization is no." Zaxeth felt that strange sensation in his neural pathways again. "You would choose death over submission?" "We would choose to remain human." The transmission ended from the human side. Admiral Thex approached the command throne cautiously. "Your Magnificence, shall we begin bombardment protocols?" Zaxeth considered this. Something was wrong with the standard approach. The humans weren't behaving like any species he had encountered. They acknowledged their military inferiority, but seemed completely unconcerned by it. "No, begin a limited demonstration. Target their largest population center with a low-yield strike. Show them what defiance costs. Target acquired. New York City, population approximately 8 million. The main display showed the target, a massive city on the continent they called North America. Millions of humans lived and worked in those towering structures, completely unaware that their lives hung in the balance. Fire when ready. The flagship's primary weapon charged and fired. A stream of concentrated energy lanced down toward the planet, designed to vaporize a city block and leave the rest intact. It was a precision strike, meant to demonstrate power while leaving survivors to spread the message. The energy beam struck. Nothing. "What happened to the shot?" Zaxeth demanded. The weapons officer checked his instruments frantically. "Sir, the beam was deflected. Something intercepted it approximately 50 kilometers above the planet's surface." Deflected? By what? Their technology can't possibly generate shields of that magnitude. "Unknown, Your Magnificence. We're detecting no artificial structures in the area. The beam just stopped." Before Zaxeth could respond, his personal communication frequency activated again. This time, the voice was different, older, with a slight accent he couldn't identify. "Hello, Emperor Zaxeth. This is Professor Sarah Mitchell, theoretical physicist, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I thought you might be wondering about your weapon malfunction." Zaxeth's enhanced vocal cords produced a sound that would have been a growl if he still had organic ones. "How do you have access to this frequency?" "Oh, we've been monitoring your communications since you arrived in our system. Fascinating technology, by the way. The quantum encryption is elegant, though it has some exploitable weaknesses. But I'm calling to explain what happened to your little demonstration." "Explain." "You see, Emperor, you made an assumption about human technology based on what you could observe. Ships, stations, obvious military installations. But you missed the important part. Humans have been working on defensive technologies for decades. We just don't build them the way you expect." On the main display, the Admiral brought up enhanced scans of the area where the weapon had been intercepted. There was nothing there. Empty space. "We call it distributed field generation," Professor Mitchell continued, sounding like she was giving a lecture to students. "Millions of small emitters, each no larger than a grain of sand, positioned throughout our orbital space. Individually, they're undetectable. Collectively, they can generate a planetary defense grid that's quite effective against directed energy weapons." Zaxeth processed this information. "You've seeded your entire orbital space with microscopic defense systems?" "Among other things, yes. We've had 40 years to prepare for this day, Emperor. We knew someone like you would eventually show up." 40 years? How could you possibly know the hegemony would come to Earth? "Because, Emperor Zaxeth, we've been watching you. Do you remember a small trade expedition that visited Earth about 40 years ago? One of your commercial vessels conducting what you thought was a routine survey of a primitive species?" Zaxeth did remember. It had been a standard operation, categorizing human technological development for future imperial planning. "That crew returned to your space with samples of our technology, our culture, and our biological patterns. But what they didn't know was that we returned the favor. We attached some very small, very clever devices to their ship." The implications hit Zaxeth like a physical blow. "You've been conducting surveillance on the hegemony?" "For 4 decades, yes. We've watched your conquests, studied your methods, learned about your technology. We know about every world you've destroyed, every species you've enslaved, every child you've murdered, including those 5,731 on Kepler 442b. Admiral Thex was running enhanced scans of the fleet, looking for surveillance devices. "Your Magnificence, I'm detecting anomalous readings on 17 ships. Microscopic foreign objects attached to hull systems." "We know about your empire, Zaxeth. Professor Mitchell continued. We know about your technology, your tactics, your weaknesses. Most importantly, we know about you. 800 years old. Cybernetically enhanced, genetically modified, and completely convinced of your own superiority. You've never lost because you've never fought anyone who understood you. Zaxeth's enhanced mind processed thousands of calculations per second. The humans had been preparing for this encounter for 40 years. They had intelligence on Imperial technology and tactics. They had defensive systems he couldn't detect or counter. But none of that explained their attitude. Even if you can defend your world, he said, you cannot win. I have resources across 10,000 systems. Eventually, I will find a way through your defenses. Oh, Emperor, you still don't understand. The voice changed again. This time it was younger, female, with an accent that sounded almost musical. This is Dr. Keiko Tanaka from the University of Tokyo. I'm a xenopsychologist, and I've been studying your species for my entire career. What's your point, human? My point is that you think this is about military victory. You think we're trying to defeat your fleet or destroy your empire. You're thinking like a Vrexian, like someone who believes might makes right. Zaxeth felt confused, an emotion his enhanced brain wasn't designed to process efficiently. What else could this be about? It's about the fact that you killed those children, Emperor. 5,131 sentient beings who never did you any harm. You killed them because it was convenient, because they were in your way, because you could. They were casualties of war. Such things are inevitable. No, they weren't. You had a choice, and you chose to murder children. That's why we said no to you. Not because we think we can defeat your empire, but because we refuse to pretend that what you did was acceptable. Zaxeth's cybernetic implants struggled to process this concept. You would choose extinction over practicality? We would choose to remain human over becoming monsters. The communication frequency filled with new voices. Hundreds, then thousands of humans, all speaking different languages but somehow making themselves understood. We remember the children of Kepler. We say no for those who cannot speak. You will not make us complicit in murder. Some things are worth dying for. No. The voices continued, growing in number, until it seemed like the entire planet was speaking with one voice, not in anger or hatred, but with absolute moral certainty. For the first time in 800 years, Emperor Zaxeth felt something that might have been doubt. Admiral, he said quietly, pull the fleet back to maximum weapons range. I need to think. As the Imperial fleet repositioned itself, Zaxeth sat alone in his command throne, trying to understand what was happening. He had faced down species with technology superior to his own and won through tactical superiority. He had faced species with greater numbers and won through better organization, but he had never faced a species that simply refused to accept that might makes right. The humans weren't trying to defeat him. They were trying to make him understand that he was wrong. And somehow, impossibly, it was working. Humanity, the meaning of the word yes. The Admiral looked surprised. Shall I prepare the full bombardment protocols? Zaxeth considered this. His standard approach was overwhelming force applied quickly and decisively, but something about the humans' response suggested they might not react like other species. No, he said, then paused as he realized he had used the same word that had started this situation. Prepare for a demonstration first. I want them to 3 days passed in an orbital standoff unlike anything in Imperial history. The Fifth Fleet maintained its position at the edge of Earth's weapons range, while Zaxeth struggled with concepts his enhanced mind had never been forced to process. Reports arrived hourly from across the Empire. The word no was being broadcast on every Imperial frequency, spoken in thousands of human voices. Somehow, humans throughout the galaxy were coordinating their resistance despite being scattered across impossible distances, with no apparent faster-than-light communication network. "Your Magnificence," Admiral Thex reported during the morning briefing. "We've traced the source of some transmissions. The humans aren't just on Earth. We've found evidence of human presence in 73 star systems across the galaxy." "Impossible. Their fastest ships couldn't have reached more than a dozen nearby systems." "Not their ships, sir. The humans themselves. Individual humans living on worlds we've already conquered, integrated into local populations, working in positions throughout our empire." Zaxeth processed this information with growing unease. "You're telling me there are human agents embedded throughout the hegemony?" "Not agents, exactly. According to our research, they appear to be refugees, traders, explorers, and immigrants who left Earth before we arrived. They've been quietly establishing themselves across the galaxy for decades." The Emperor stood and began pacing his command deck, a habit he had developed centuries ago when facing complex strategic problems. "How many?" "Conservative estimates suggest at least 50,000 humans scattered across Imperial space. They've been living normal lives, raising families, working ordinary jobs. Until now." "Until now?" "Until you killed those children on Kepler 442b. That's when they all started saying no." A new voice interrupted the briefing. This time it came through the ship's general communication system, not his personal frequency. Every speaker on the bridge carried the same human voice. Old and tired, but filled with quiet strength. "Emperor Zaxeth, this is Captain Marcus Rodriguez of the merchant vessel Esperanza. I've been living on Tau Ceti Prime for 15 years, running a small cargo operation. I have a wife there, 2 children, a good life. Yesterday, Governor Thax ordered me to report for questioning because I'm human." Zaxeth activated his communication system. "State your purpose, human." "I want you to understand something, Emperor. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a spy. I'm just a man trying to make a living and raise his family. But when I heard what you did to those children, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. What you do in the outer territories is not my concern." "But it is, though. You see, my daughter is 7 years old. She's friends with Rexian children, Centauri children, even some young Keplerians who survived your attack on their world. When she asked me why someone would hurt children who couldn't fight back, I couldn't think of a good answer." Captain Rodriguez paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "So I told her the truth. I told her that sometimes powerful people do terrible things because they can, and that the only way to stop them is for good people to say no, even when it's dangerous, even when it might cost everything. Your daughter will not save you from the consequences of rebellion. I'm not trying to save myself, Emperor. I'm trying to save her world. Because if I don't stand up now, if I let you turn the galaxy into a place where children die because it's convenient, then what kind of world am I leaving for her?" The transmission ended, but Zaxeth found himself staring at the communication console long after the voice had faded. In 800 years of rule, no one had ever explained their defiance in terms of what they were trying to protect, rather than what they were trying to gain. "Admiral," he said quietly, "how many of our worlds have human populations?" "Significant numbers on at least 300 worlds, scattered presence on over 1,000 more." "And they're all saying no?" "Yes, Your Magnificence. Even the ones with families, established lives, everything to lose. They're all refusing to cooperate with Imperial authorities." Zaxeth returned to his command throne and activated his personal database. He pulled up detailed files on human psychology, biology, and cultural development. For the first time in centuries, he was studying an enemy not to defeat them, but to understand them. What he found challenged every assumption he had made about power and control. Humans, it seemed, had evolved in small tribal groups where individual survival depended on group cooperation. They had developed what their scientists called altruism and empathy, the ability to sacrifice personal benefit for the good of others, even others they had never met. More disturbing to Zaxeth's worldview was the discovery that humans seemed to have an instinctive resistance to authority they perceived as illegitimate. Their history was filled with examples of individuals who chose death over submission to tyrants. "Your Magnificence," the communications officer interrupted his research. "We're receiving another transmission. This one is different." "How different?" "It's coming from the planet's surface, but it's being broadcast simultaneously on every frequency they have. Every human communication device on Earth appears to be carrying the same signal." "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was that of a child, young, clear-speaking galactic standard, with the careful pronunciation of someone who had learned it as a second language. "Hello, Emperor Zaxeth. My name is Liu Wei. I am 9 years old and I live in Beijing on Earth. My teacher asked our class to write letters to you, and mine was chosen to read aloud." Zaxeth felt his enhanced nervous system react in ways it hadn't for centuries. A child was addressing him directly, apparently without fear. "Dear Emperor," the young voice continued, "I want you to know that we learned about what happened to the children on that planet you attacked. My grandmother cried when she heard the news. She said it reminded her of stories from our history, about times when bad people hurt children just because they could." The bridge had become completely silent. Every Imperial officer, trained in the brutal efficiency of the hegemony, was listening to a child's letter. "I don't understand why you did that, Emperor. My parents taught me that strong people are supposed to protect children, not hurt them. They said that's what makes someone truly strong, using your power to help people who can't help themselves." The child paused, and Zaxeth could hear paper rustling, as if she was reading from notes. "I know you probably think we're weak because we're small and don't have big spaceships like yours, but my grandfather told me something important. He said that being weak isn't about how big you are or how many weapons you have. Being weak is when you hurt people because you're afraid of what might happen if you don't." Zaxeth's cybernetic hands gripped the arms of his throne with enough force to dent the metal. "Are you afraid, Emperor Zaxeth? Is that why you killed those children? Because you were scared of what might happen if you didn't?" The transmission paused again, and when the child's voice returned, it was softer, sadder. "I feel sorry for you, Emperor. It must be very lonely to be so scared all the time that you can't see the difference between being strong and being mean." The communication ended with a simple statement that echoed through the bridge. "We still say no, Emperor. Not because we think we can beat you, but because someone has to." In the silence that followed, Zaxeth found himself remembering something he had not thought about in over 700 years. His own childhood, before the cybernetic enhancements, before the genetic modifications, before 8 centuries of absolute power had carved empathy out of his brain. He remembered being young and afraid, witnessing his father's troops destroy a village that had refused to pay tribute. He remembered the children's screams and how he had asked his father why they had to die. "Because that's how power works," his father had told him. "Fear keeps the empire strong." But what if his father had been wrong? What if fear wasn't strength at all, but weakness dressed up in impressive weapons? "Admiral Thex," Zaxeth said slowly, "I want detailed reports on every world where humans are saying no. I want to know what they're actually doing, not just that they're refusing to cooperate." The reports arrived within hours. Humans weren't just saying no, they were actively protecting others. Human doctors were treating wounded Keplerians. Human engineers were helping rebuild destroyed infrastructure. Human teachers were caring for orphaned children from dozens of species. They were doing what they had always done throughout their history, standing between the powerful and the powerless, even when it cost them everything. "Your Magnificence," Admiral Thex said carefully, "what are your orders regarding the human population centers?" Zaxeth sat in his command throne for a long time, processing 800 years of absolute certainty, crashing against the simple moral clarity of a 9-year-old child. Finally, he activated his communication system and opened a channel to every human on Earth. "This is Emperor Zaxeth of the Galactic Hegemony," he began, his enhanced voice carrying across millions of receivers. "I have heard your word, no, and I have tried to understand why you would choose to die rather than submit to superior force." He paused, struggling with concepts that his cybernetic enhancements had been designed to eliminate. "You have shown me something I thought I had destroyed in myself long ago. You have reminded me that true strength is not the ability to take whatever you want, but the wisdom to know what should never be taken." The bridge crew stared at their emperor in shock as he continued speaking. "The children of Kepler 442b died because I believed that power gave me the right to kill them. You have shown me that power gives me something else entirely, the responsibility to protect them." Zaxeth stood from his throne, removing the crown that had symbolized 8 centuries of tyrannical rule. "I hereby dissolve the galactic hegemony. All conquered worlds are released from imperial control. All tribute payments are canceled. All military actions against civilian populations are to cease immediately." Admiral Thex stepped forward, his expression desperate. "Your Magnificence, you cannot simply—" "I can, Admiral. And I will, because a 9-year-old child from Earth just taught me the difference between a ruler and a tyrant." The Emperor looked out at the blue-green world that had changed everything with a single word. "Humanity will not join the hegemony," he continued, "because the hegemony no longer exists. In its place, I propose something new. An alliance of free worlds, working together to ensure that what happened on Kepler 442b never happens again." The communication frequency filled with human voices, but this time they weren't saying no. They were saying something else entirely. Yes. For the first time in 800 years, Emperor Zaxeth smiled without any enhancement, without any modification, with nothing but the genuine joy of a being who had rediscovered what it meant to be truly strong. The child who had asked if he was afraid had been right about everything. He had been afraid of losing control, afraid of appearing weak, afraid of admitting that his empire was built on the suffering of innocence. But humans had taught him that the strongest word in any language wasn't yes or no, it was sorry, and he had a lot of apologizing to do what they're refusing. As the orders went out across the fleet, Zaxeth found himself actually looking forward to the encounter. After 800 years of predictable conquests, the humans had provided something he hadn't experienced in a very long time: genuine curiosity about what would happen next. He suspected he was about to learn exactly why humans had survived on what the database described as a death world where everything tries to kill you. The flagship's engines began their startup sequence, and the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace. Destination: the Sol system, 3rd planet from the star. Zaxeth smiled for the first time in decades. This was going to be interesting.